I'm gonna start off with some background about BAF and these weekly online meetups that we do as everyone keeps joining in the next 2 minutes. BAF is a nonprofit that starts accredited blockchain courses at universities. We build projects, connect our students to opportunities in the space, and we're actually a DAO of students that is governed by the leaders of our affiliated blockchain clubs. We organize these weekly online meetups for you guys to connect to industry experts, both technical and non-technical, and we essentially create educational programs that are designed to get you jobs. So if you're interested in learning more about BAF, check out our Twitter account. All the links are in the bio. And today's guest is Nader Dabit, someone I look up to a lot, and I'm sure many of you do as well. He recently joined Developer Relations at Celestia, and he's building the first modular blockchain network. So very revolutionizing, a very new concept that we're going to delve into step by step. First, I'd like to share my understanding of Celestia and blockchain modularity. I really like the parallel that Nick White, CEO of Celestia, made in a podcast where he said that before Ethereum, people were very excited about Bitcoin and decentralized applications. Then Ethereum came along and said, hey, we're going to build a general purpose blockchain on which you can build a decentralized application without having to build a new blockchain. Celestia is taking this one step further and allowing you to do the same thing, but for the execution environment. So basically, with Celestia, you can build a new blockchain for all intents and purposes without actually building a new consensus network. Nader, can you tell me if I got that right? And can you give us a better high-level overview of Celestia?
Yeah, that's a great overview. I mean, it's a very honestly complex and nuanced topic, the modular approach, because there's a lot of different things that are happening, and we're going to cover as many as we can today. But I think it's also worth, if you're interested in this topic, diving into some resources, which I will actually go ahead and share now to go ahead and get people started. So, a good place to start would be the link that I just shared here. It's kind of a short thread, but more importantly, the resources at the end of that thread are kind of some of the resources that I currently am actually studying myself to continue, understanding how to communicate some of the stuff going on, as well as to even understand some of the more technical things that are happening there. But you gave a pretty good overview, and I think the best way to kind of just give an introduction to Celestia is that it is what you would consider a layer one blockchain, but all it does is data availability and consensus. And it's pioneering this idea of modularity, where instead of having all of the different layers coupled together in a monolithic blockchain, we can achieve better scale and better accessibility and more sovereignty by separating the different layers. And those layers are consensus, data availability, execution, and settlement. And not only do you see Celestia having pioneered this idea of moving forward with it, but you're also starting to see a lot of other blockchains realize that this is a more optimal strategy for scaling than almost anything else out there. And therefore, you see even Ethereum going almost exactly down the same route that we're going, with one small exception, or maybe one major exception, or there's a small, depending on how you look at it, difference between the strategy that Ethereum is following, but they're still now pivoting their entire roadmap to this modular approach. Polygon as well is building out something called Avail, which is really just essentially a fork or a copy of what we're doing. And I think that you're starting to see more and more people acknowledge this approach, because the general idea of where we want to be with Web3 is that we want to be able to handle, global scale, meaning we can't be okay with hundreds of transactions per second being like the top level scalability of what like these networks can handle. Instead, what we really want is to be at the same scale as traditional infrastructure. And DynamoDB, for example, is a database that you can run in AWS, and you can spin up a single database and it can handle millions of transactions per second, and anyone can do that. But here we are with our layer 2 rollups still getting bottlenecked at dozens of transactions per second. So the reason I thought that Celestia was extremely interesting is that I care deeply about accessibility and scalability, and being able to kind of work with this team is kind of a dream come true.
Oh, I bet. I'm very excited about this conversation because it's really about imagining a future of millions of blockchains. Because right now we kind of view these blockchains as their own separate islands. But how do we prepare for that future of the open web and for a multiverse of blockchains, essentially? So you're right. This is a very new topic, new concept. How about we kind of start with fundamental definitions and mental models, splitting the blockchain between execution and consensus. Let's kind of take those apart separately. What's consensus versus execution, and how do they currently operate with the current state of Web3?
Yes. So consensus is essentially just ordering the blocks of data in the proper order, and execution is actually taking the data and um, kind of like transacting or playing back the transactions to come up with the current state of the blockchain. So when you think about Ethereum, it does all these things together, and therefore you're kind of just interacting with that single network. But with Celestia, we don't actually care about the current state of the network that you're building itself. So, like, let's say you wanted to deploy a rollup to Celestia, like Optimism, for example, we wouldn't necessarily say, okay, this is the current state of this rollup that is Optimism on top of Celestia. Instead, we would just provide the data availability, and the rollup itself would then actually come up with the current state of that network itself.
Got it. So, how do participants in the Celestia network agree on the order of transactions?
The ordering of the transactions is done, just like I would say any decentralized like blockchain network where you have different nodes that are all running and are, we have our traditional, you could say, proof of stake, network. I believe that we are using something called Tendermint, which is something that was forked from the Cosmos community. And if you want to run a node in the network, we actually have some really easy to follow documentation. In fact, I literally just got off of a recording just now where I recorded a video, and it takes about 4 minutes to spin up a light node, and then you can participate in the network and be someone that's kind of helping to secure the network. And one of the major differences, I think, between and this is not just, I think this is kind of one of the major innovations, I think, that I would say about Celestia, is that we have, or they have come up with a new way for creating light clients that provide almost the same security guarantees of a full node. And that's kind of like the core innovation that really made all of this stuff possible, which allows for the network to scale along with linearly, as far as like the number of users that come online and the number of transactions per second go up. We can also scale the decentralization by having a lot more people participate in the network for providing this verification of the data, when in the past it would have required people to be running a lot of like expensive types of hardware, uh, which would have traditionally been like a full node. But people can now actually run these light nodes on hardware as, lightweight as a mobile phone, for example.
Got it. That is really cool. The original paper that inspired Celestia is called Lazy Ledger. So Celestia is a lazy blockchain. It does less. It does not even look at the transaction data that people are dumping into it, from what I understood. It just Merkleizes it and has a special scheme of building this block that enables something called data availability sampling. And that makes it more scalable, from what I understood. Can you give us more details there?
Yeah, so data availability sampling is, again, yeah, that's kind of like the core innovation of what Celestia is. And the way that I can kind of describe it, I guess, is that if you want to create a full node and you want to have full security guarantees in the layer one, traditional like layer one space, you would download and execute all of the transactions, and then you would come up with the current state of the chain. And then therefore you would have a security guarantee that you are dealing with the right information. Um, Light clients, on the other hand, they only, instead of running all these transactions, they only take the block headers, and then they assume that those block headers are truthful, but there isn't the same security guarantee of a full node. What data availability sampling allows these light clients to do is, instead of making them essentially download and execute all of these data to come up with the state, um, there is like an attack that prevented this from happening before, called a data withholding attack. And the way that I can try to describe it is something like, if you are a light client and you're getting these block headers, someone can submit a header that has information that isn't true. And the reason that you can't verify that information isn't true is because they do something called a data withholding attack, meaning they don't actually submit all of the data to the network. But the only way for a light client to prove that that's true would be to essentially, download all this information and kind of come up with the current state. Data availability sampling uses something called erasure coding that allows the client to download just a very small subset of that data. And then with the other nodes in the network doing the same thing, they together come up with the consensus that all of that data is indeed been published to the network without a lot of actual work. So I believe, with one sampling, you have 50%. You're 50% insurity, I guess, of the data being published. When you sample two times, you have 75%. So with just a handful of samples, you have over 99 point, I think 999%, some like really really high number. So that's kind of how data availability sampling like works, and how it enables these light clients to achieve almost the same security guarantees as a full node.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And you said that other players in the space right now are pivoting towards modularity. Basically, in a monolithic blockchain, there's only one state transition function that you can implement. You're either stuck with the Bitcoin blockchain, where you can't run the EVM on the Bitcoin blockchain, or you're stuck in Ethereum, where you can only interact with the EVM. So how does modularity look like right now in Ethereum? And does it allow other forms of execution? Why would people who really believe in Ethereum and they see that Ethereum is moving towards modularity, why would they be more excited about Celestia?
Yeah, that's a really good point. A good question, and also a good thing for me to kind of just roll back on and touch on what you just kind of mentioned before the question itself, is like the evolution of blockchains. And I think that it's a good way to conceptualize and visualize like what's going on here. So with the traditional like tech stack or tech world, we had the evolution from like people running their own servers in their home, and then that was kind of a heavy lift. A lot of people were unable to actually build applications, obviously, because you had to be very technical. And we saw like in the late 90s and early 2000s, this idea of shared hosting became extremely popular, where you could deploy a WordPress site, or do something like in a cPanel, and you could share a hosting service with other people, and you could easily deploy an application. But you didn't have really full control over the environment. You were just using the environment that was given to you, and then you didn't really. There was a lot of negative trade-offs there. And then with cloud computing and virtual machines in the mid 2000s, I guess, that became extremely popular. You were then able to have full control over your entire environment. You could deploy a database. You could change the operating system. You could do whatever you want. You can literally just create a completely fresh, area for you to start building. And I think we're seeing the same evolution in blockchains when we had Bitcoin was the first one. And if you wanted to deploy another blockchain, another application, you couldn't really just obviously use the Bitcoin network because all it did was one thing. You could fork the code base maybe and make a small modification. Then you would have to bootstrap an entire network. And people didn't even understand or know the idea that you could build something like the EVM until Ethereum was launched. So instead of having application specific blockchains, which before Ethereum were mainly for cryptocurrencies, you had Litecoin and all these other ones, the EVM allowed everyone in the world to kind of share this one execution environment, kind of like shared hosting. So you could upload an application, and other people can interact with it. But we're all at this point, we're all still sharing a single machine, which not only proved itself not to be scalable, but also you are losing sovereignty. And when you think about kind of what blockchains are, they're a way for communities and people to coordinate. They're kind of like social coordination mechanisms. And if you have to share the underlying, what you would kind of like consider the settlement layer with everyone else, what you see happening is like you don't have full control over what happens because the Ethereum community is kind of deciding where the blockchain goes. So like a few examples of this would be, we have these massive DeFi protocols all running on Ethereum, right? Or we did for a while. You saw hacks of like hundreds of millions of dollars. If you were running your own blockchain, you could easily just fork and regain that money for the entire network, and you would easily achieve social consensus with everyone within that network. But it's impossible to convince the entire Ethereum community to fork the entire chain, even for $500 million or something like that, because it's so widely used. You're kind of like now bound to everyone else that's using it. So what you saw last couple of weeks ago was one of the first examples of a massive, probably the biggest, if not not the biggest, one of the biggest DeFi protocols, DYDX, pivoting away from the Ethereum ecosystem into this more app chain specific world, where they're deploying their own app chain on Cosmos, which is a similar approach to what sovereign rollups will look like on Celestia, because they now have full control over their network. Not only are they able to launch their own application, but they're launching their own blockchain. And in addition to having full control over the network and being able to fork if anything happens, they also have more value accrual going to their own token. Because when you're interacting on the Ethereum network, all of that value accrual is happening to the Ethereum token. But I think when one of the things that people are considering, if you have a massive protocol that many people interacting with, it's more valuable for your own token if you have your own blockchain. Now, this is an extremely, somewhat, I would say, hard thing to do right now. And Cosmos hasn't actually, I'm sorry, DYDX hasn't actually like achieved that yet. They've just announced that that's kind of the direction that they're going. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that as it becomes easier. So yeah, that's just kind of like an overview of kind of what the way I see everything headed. Now, you had another question about why would someone choose Celestia over Ethereum? Yeah, I think we're still gonna. I think we're still gonna see what happens with that, because like this idea of blockchain modularity is still early. I'm sorry, Celestia doesn't even have our own mainnet publicly available yet. We're still on testnet. Ethereum really just completely pivoted their roadmap in the last few months to go in this direction. So you know how long it takes Ethereum. They still haven't even merged proof of stake yet. That's been something that's been talked about for years. So we're merging proof of stake. I guess they're merging that in the next few months. There was a good talk from Dankrad. I forgot his last name, but he was, I think, the main one that was kind of like pushing forward with how the implementation of modularity would look on Ethereum. He spoke about it at ETH Prague. There was also a podcast episode a couple of days ago with Dankrad, as well as one of the founders of Celestia. talking about the separate approaches between Ethereum and Celestia. So I think the main differences between the Ethereum approach and the Celestia approach is this idea of sovereignty. So when you are using Ethereum, even if Ethereum kind of moves into this direction, and they are implementing data availability sampling as well, you are bound to the settlement layer of Ethereum. So Ethereum has this enshrined settlement layer that everyone shares. Whereas again with Celestia, there is no settlement layer. You can deploy your own settlement layer. You can use a settlement layer someone else has deployed, or you can just deploy a completely sovereign rollup that has its own settlement layer built in. And that's one difference. Another difference I think is we might see scalability still be a challenge if you are using Ethereum, because you still have to allow transactions to be happening on Ethereum. So like if the block price is still, if it's still expensive to transact, then even posting these like layer 2 call data might be more expensive in some way. We don't really know yet, I guess. So, and then I also think that you might see teams like Celestia and also Polygon Avail is building almost the exact same thing, moving a little faster than Ethereum. So maybe the go-to-market will be faster, and therefore like adoption will spike up. And I also don't think it's kind of like going to be a zero-sum game. I think that you're going to see, a lot of people building in this way going forward. Now that Ethereum, Polygon, Celestia, and a few others are headed this way as well.
Yeah, it's very clear that innovation is kind of held back because of the monolithic paradigm. Like if I want to experiment with a new execution environment, I have to build an entirely different blockchain, and that's a huge bootstrapping cost that prevents people from experimenting. And what Celestia is building is definitely not easy. And I guess it's good that many people are trying to work towards this multi-chain universe. But I guess now is a good time to talk about rollups. So in a monolithic chain, whenever transactions or a new block is mined, they're made sure that they're valid first and foremost by the validators. In Celestia's eyes, anyone can submit a transaction. It doesn't even have to be valid. It's all just data. This leads me to a question: who enforces the execution and the validity of the state transitions that happen in Celestia? And if you, before you explain that, if you could kind of give us uh, an explanation of what rollups are, the different types, and then where they come into Celestia.
Yeah, I mean, rollups could be thought of as modular, a piece of a modular stack already, and it kind of is kind of like the birth of the modular stack. In fact, the person that kind of invented optimistic rollups is John Adler, who's the founder of Celestia, who went and founded Celestia afterwards. But I guess you could define rollup as a type of blockchain that kind of specializes in execution, and it offloads the settlement, the consensus, and the data availability to like a separate layer. So instead of trying to kind of do everything, it kind of only does execution, and then it posts these, I guess, proofs and into another chain that receives it as call data, and it doesn't really do anything else.
Right.
And then what was the other question?
Just how do rollups come into Celestia, and how are they different from other ecosystems?
Yeah, so with Celestia rollups for first class citizens, we kind of I think that all blockchains in the future are going to be what would you could consider rollups. So instead of this idea of like a normal just blockchain just taking single transactions and then processing them, the rollups will be what people will be building on, and a rollup being a first class citizen means that like you not only think of like someone deploying a blockchain as a rollup, you might even start considering deploying an app chain as a rollup or an application as a rollup, like DYDX is doing. So if you can just as easily spin up your own blockchain, deploy it as you could a application, or today to the EVM. You are giving your users a more, I think, scalable platform to transact on, because even with where we're seeing the scalability improvements happening, um, I guess it would make, in my opinion, a lot more sense if you could possibly just say, okay, I'm going to have 10 million users, and we're not going to have to share execution with everyone else in the entire world. Only our users are going to be using our blockchain, and therefore, I think that you're going to see the ability for the entire world to kind of like scale the future of Web3, following this approach. I think the main challenge, though, is cross-chain interoperability when you kind of go this route, because if everyone's deploying their own chain, how might you interact between chains? Depending on the type of application that you're building, that might not even be something that you worry about, right? But like, let's say DeFi protocol or something like that, where you might want to kind of like transact tokens across different applications. That's kind of where that would come into consideration, and I think that that's going to be something that we see innovated as these modular blockchain environments start going into production, which will probably be something like the first quarter of 2023.
So when we're talking interoperability, is that where the settlement layer comes in, or is it something different?
Yeah, I think that you could consider there's a handful of different ways that interop would be considered. Let me go ahead and pull up a post, because I think, well, actually, yeah, let me share something in this space that kind of really goes into all this. So we had from our team the founder and the author of that Lazy Ledger paper, Mustafa. He wrote a blog post called "Rollups as Sovereign Chains," and in that he went over, let's see here, a handful of different cross-chain communication um, methods that are very nuanced, and also fairly technical. So I would say, instead of like going into this conversation, which is something that I don't have probably the best ability to discuss, I would check out this blog post, which is something I'm currently still like reading and grokking myself.
Oh yeah, I bet. I mean, I'm still barely grasping all of these complicated concepts. So even getting a high level idea of kind of these different components of modularity uh, is actually pretty damn helpful as we embrace this new concept. So could you tell us more on the settlement layer? From my understanding, it's a coordination mechanism between different rollups. But if not, no worries, we could move on to something else.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned before, the core pieces are going to be consensus, state availability, settlement, and execution. And all that Celestia does is the data availability and the consensus. So the two options, I think, that you're going to see people, well, I would say the way that people are going to kind of like mix up these different layers going forward in the future, once all this stuff is more production ready and more mainstream, is that you will have shared consensus. I'm sorry, shared settlement layers, where if I want to deploy my own app chain, I can leverage someone else's settlement layer and then just deploy my own chain there. Now, this is kind of more along the lines of what Ethereum is doing, because Ethereum does have a settlement layer that's kind of like built in, and therefore you have less sovereignty, because like you don't really have full control over that settlement layer, meaning that if they choose to make a change or a hard fork, you kind of have to follow along with what's going on there. Whereas if you kind of deploy your own settlement layer, you have full control over everything that's going forward.
Right. So to recap, there's different resources that need to be consumed to build a decentralized application. One of them is execution. Another one is block space, which is when someone needs data and block space. The resource that Celestia is selling is data availability as a service. The rollups, they're their own thing, which is all about execution. Now, moving on to a question that is probably more exciting to people here. Celestia is a proof of stake network. Is there a token, and when airdrop?
um, yeah, there's going to be a token, but there isn't a token quite yet. So it'll probably come and towards the end of the year or something like that. I can't really speak to any airdrop, but it is something that's being considered. But kind of to just recap the different layers, I think just to kind of give a almost like an elevator type of pitch. Execution processes the transactions, consensus orders the transactions, data availability ensures that the data is available, and settlement does kind of like dispute resolution and bridging.
Got it. Got it. That's very clear. So, sorry, I had to ask about the token, even though I already knew your answer. But
Okay.
so, how is the token model different than Ethereum, especially in terms of gas fees? Do they go up if Celestia grows? How does it work?
Yeah, it's so the general idea is that we are hoping and aiming for a lot more consistent transaction costs. Um, and that's kind of I think that we're going to see a lot lower and a lot more consistent pricing at scale with Celestia than we've seen with basically probably any other truly decentralized network that exists today. And that's kind of the whole idea and the whole point. It's hard to predict like the exact transaction costs, and there's probably some variables that really are going to say like it depends. But I mean, one of the reasons I'm here is because of the promise of this low transaction costs at scale, but also consistent transaction costs. Because the problem that we've seen with rollups on Ethereum, as they exist today, at least, is that like even with the promise of more throughput, um, what we saw like with the Yuga Labs, which is like the Bored Ape Yacht Club, they did this like land sale, and this was kind of like a really a big event, in my opinion, to kind of show that what we were doing just wasn't working. The layer twos that were supposed to be really inexpensive became like tens of dollars per transaction. And in my opinion, like anything more than like a couple of cents per transaction is too expensive. And ideally, we want to be less than 1 cent per transaction. And it cannot be variable. It needs to be consistent. Because if you build out an application like what are the true things that excite me, like Lens Protocol, these social networks where you're kind of like doing dozens of transactions maybe per day, um, that's not accessible to people all around the world if it costs even $1.50. In fact, they should be so cheap that the network can subsidize them, as you see with like gasless transactions on Lens Protocol. So yeah, that was a really big event in my opinion when we saw that happen, and it kind of exposed the fact that like the current approach isn't working. And I know that Ethereum is moving in this direction as well, so that's great. But yeah, it's just not yeah, it's just not viable to kind of to expect that people are going to be okay with that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And does more node sampling mean safely increasing the block size in Celestia?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the big um, innovations is that data availability sampling allows larger block size, therefore higher throughput, to happen as the number of transaction grows, as the number of users are on the network, the ability to have more nodes, light nodes or light clients running,
Right.
enables that. And I think like the best way to describe it is that in the traditional tech space, we think of scalability as like the throughput or the number of transactions per second. I mentioned something like DynamoDB that can handle millions of transactions per second. The only real difference in like Web3 or in blockchains is that you also have to take into consideration the people in the network that are validating that data is actually precise, or verifying the data. And the way that you do that is either with like full nodes or light clients or light nodes. With Ethereum, again, like in order to run a full node, you download and execute all the transactions to come up with the current state. Light nodes use just the block headers and make assumptions that don't give you the full security guarantees. The uh, the data availability sampling technique that was, one of the the big ideas that enables all this, essentially allows light clients that can run on a very lightweight machine to achieve almost the exact same security guarantees as a full node.
Yeah, that sounds crazy to me because you're basically democratizing people's ability to run full nodes. And I'm going to leak some BAF alpha here. We're currently designing a validator program to help engage student clubs and support them with hardware and mentorship to run validators. So if you're on this call and you're part of a blockchain club or interested in contributing to this BAF project, my DMs are open. And if Celestia and other ecosystem players present here are interested in engaging in BAF's university partners to run validators and decentralize your network, our validator program is for you. But it's really, really a game changer that you're helping people run nodes on their phones. So that's very exciting. But with all of these ambitious things that you're working on, there has to be some limits of scaling. But I will leave that to the end. There's a question from someone in the audience about Validiums in Ethereum versus Celestiums in Celestia. What are the similarities and the differences there?
So Celestians are something that we've been building to specifically allow developers that want to still use Ethereum as the settlement layer to kind of still be able to build on Ethereum. And the main thing, I guess you could say, that Celestiums do are they allow you to deploy, your chain using Celestia as the data availability and consensus network, and using Ethereum as the settlement layer. And that's kind of it. So like you can, instead of like choosing a different settlement layer, you can easily just use Ethereum as a settlement layer, and it's just a way for developers to kind of build in that direction. So you
Got it.
can kind of like decide on your own execution environment. You could literally build, you could literally fork and deploy Optimism. You could deploy Sea Level from Solana, Fuel, anything you want. You could toy around with your own EVM and then deploy it using Ethereum as a settlement layer.
Yeah, that really frees developers and allows more flexibility for sure. Another question that I got from someone on Discord is about the concept of shared security in Celestia. How is that superior to existing solutions? Someone is asking.
Yeah, I mean, with it's actually a pretty powerful thing that you can deploy and bootstrap a completely new blockchain network without having to bootstrap an entire validator set to secure that network. Instead, you're sharing the security of the underlying data availability and consensus layer. So you have shared security in the same sense that you would if you were using something like Ethereum. Um, but you have, I would say, maybe like a lot more control if you're building in this modular way, if you're taking the route of deploying your own chain. There's also going to be developers that will just treat Celestia rollups like they would any other rollup, and what you're going to see is like Sea Level, Fuel, Optimism, maybe even Arbitrum, or these other chains, people that are already starting to work on integrations on Celestia, where they're going to build and deploy those chains on Celestia, and then you can actually write your smart contracts to them as opposed to Optimism. And I guess in the hopes of this implementation being more scalable than the existing implementations. So you wouldn't really have to like learn or do anything different. You just change your RPC endpoint and boom, everything is ready to go.
Got it. Cool. I'd like to open it up to the audience a little bit. If anyone has any questions, just raise your hand or request to speak, and me and Alexis will grant you access. Just added you to the stage. Let's see what Degrees has
Hello.
to
Thanks
say.
everybody for the info. My question was around like sidechains. How does like a sidechain use case contrast to like a dedicated blockchain or fit into this broader conversation around like blockchain modularity? Obviously, there's trade-offs in security. Is it really just kind of about owning like the settlement layer itself, and like is it really about performance basically, or and then like we contrasting like when you've seen like use cases like the Ronin network or like with Axie Infinity and how they kind of did that. I know there was some vulnerabilities, but like, how does that fit into this conversation around blockchain modularity was my question, because I feel like there's a lot of overlapping functionality if we're talking EVM settlement layers.
Yeah, would you consider, I guess, Polygon's the main network that you consider Polygon like a sidechain, and comparing that to something that you might deploy
Well, I
on?
think wouldn't the Polygon be different than a sidechain, where like this is a layer two versus like a sidechain itself, having the security aspect and control of the sidechain itself? I think that was like the core difference between like a Polygon and a dedicated sidechain. I could be wrong though.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's the definition of a sidechain versus the definition of what like Polygon is claiming. What they're doing is, I think they tried to frame it as like a layer two, but obviously a lot of people pushed back on that and they called it a sidechain. I think there's just like a nuanced discussion or description around what that means, but there are similarities, I guess you could say. I think the main difference would be that again, you don't have to actually worry about bootstrapping a network or anything like that when you're building on Celestia. You can have like the type of decentralization that you would have with a network like Ethereum, and that would be kind of like the main um, selling point, I guess you could say. But in addition, obviously, to like the promises, the promises of scalability that you would get as well.
And my last question, great, thank you. My last question was like on the settlement layer, not by having that, let's say, happening on Ethereum, isn't that more of a feature than a bug because you have this community that's sort of pushing an upgrade? And then if you are in control of your settlement layer with your own chain, now all of a sudden either your community or your kind of bandwidth has to be pushing that as an upgrade over time? Or do you feel like that's like more of a feature than a bug from your perspective?
Using Ethereum as a settlement layer?
Yeah, like if you weren't going to use Ethereum as a settlement layer versus if you were.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is like often it depends. I think if that you want to have, if you are a DYDX, if you are a $1 billion protocol and you want to have that protection, you wouldn't probably use Ethereum as a settlement layer because you're then enshrined to that settlement layer, and you have less control. But like if you did want to do a fork or something like that and regain some state, you could probably easily gain community consensus from within DYDX. But getting that from the entire community would be a lot tougher. But let's say that it's not that serious. You're just building something and you don't really care about having that full control. Then you might choose Ethereum as a settlement layer just because you do care about being part of that community or something like that. But I
Right.
think it's more about the ideas around social consensus than anything, as opposed to like a technical reason.
Cool, thanks. Usman, do you want to go up next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks everyone for allowing me to speak. I guess my question was more centered around the security aspect of having a modular blockchain. I love the idea of giving developers the ability to take full control of what they're building on chain. But when you put these execution layers off chain, does that in turn cause negative throughput for security, or does that in any way render it a little bit like as a disadvantage versus other chains?
I can't really think of any reason that you would be giving up any security. In fact, I think that you would be, again, having the ability to have shared security between what will ultimately probably be a pretty massive network of nodes, and therefore it would probably be a net positive. I'm trying to think, like, obviously if you deployed some type of chain that you built yourself and you had some vulnerabilities there, then that would be, something to take into consideration. But if you are speaking to the security that the Celestia network itself provides, I would say that it's probably nothing that I would think as I can't really think of any downsides as far as security is concerned.
Okay, definitely, yeah. And then yeah, the last question I had was just regarding other layer ones that have had taken their own approach to the scalability issue that we've seen. Chains like Avalanche that are implementing things like subnets, or Polygon, which are kind of doing the supernet aspect of that. What do you think about chains that are doing that and trying to tackle scalability in that regard versus in the modular way?
I think that the only approach that I think is the way that we're building, and also I think like the future and the ultimate solution, or a solution to the blockchain trilemma, is actually completely separating the all these different layers. Because again, if you have a monolithic approach, you have built in, not only the data availability and the consensus, but you also again have the settlement and the execution. And at some point, you're going to have people innovating in all of these different layers. And if you've kind of made a decision at some point to say, okay, this is the way we're doing things, we're going to stick to this, then you are kind of limiting, I think, like the future of where your development is. So I think that Polygon actually is moving in this direction with Polygon Avail, which is something that they've started building, which is essentially the same thing as what Celestia is, and the same thing that Ethereum is doing with their data availability sampling as well. And I think it's become a fairly accepted narrative with a lot of people that building in the monolithic like design um, might scale to a certain extent, but if we want to actually, reach where we would want to be in a few years with Web3, with the type of scalability that we see on something like AWS, that having the separation of concerns, the decoupling of all these different layers is kind of the right approach, and that's also the approach that I believe in, and why I'm kind of like at Celestia.
Sorry, I just thought of a new question as you were talking. So do you think decoupling those layers would, hurt the decentralization aspect of it in any way, or would that still remain intact?
No, I don't think so. I mean, again, the security, I believe, comes from the consensus of the data availability. And when you have a large network that is all kind of like sharing that, you're not losing anything if you're offloading the execution or the settlement to a different layer. Because I believe, and it's also the belief of like the founders, and even if you hear some of the discussions with Dankrad around the future of Ethereum, is like that security actually comes from that base consensus and data availability layer.
Okay, definitely. Thank you so much for the responses.
Thank you guys for your questions. Anyone else wants to ask a question? Just put on an emoji and try to unmute yourself, and we'll put you on stage. In the meantime, are there any other components or aspects of Celestia that we did not touch on, Nader?
I think just kind of talking about the roadmap and things like that, I could just touch on. So for right now, the only thing that you can work with on Celestia is the test network. It's called Mamaki Test Network. And it is simply the data availability and the consensus layer. Again, you can submit transactions, you can read transactions, but you can't really build anything with it at the moment. We are rolling out some more developer-facing, I would say, rollups in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for that. If you want to be kind of like one of the first people to kind of build and get involved with the ecosystem and the community, and be part of the early, I guess, community of what we're working on, you'll see some opportunities to do that in the next few weeks. We're focusing on a couple of different projects that we'll be launching and announcing, over the course of the next few months. We're going to be launching an incentivized test network, and then we're going to be launching our main network probably at the beginning of next year, or at the end of this year, or something like that. So also, Ethereum, while they are also moving in this direction, haven't really launched anything yet either. So all this stuff is like really early, and it'll be interesting to see how quickly Ethereum does the proof of stake merge, how they get that done, and then how quickly they move on to implementing this modular approach. And yeah, it's just something that's still fairly early. So these ideas are mainly just that at this moment. Like they're ideas, and we haven't actually seen them in practice. So it's still fairly early.
Cool. You're leaking early alpha. Thanks for the clear call to action for our listeners. We'll also share some resources and the materials that Nader shared in the space on our newsletter for people who didn't listen to the whole thing. And with that, I'd like to recap by saying we're really entering an era of modularism, not maximalism. Each blockchain should not be its own island, and we really want to see a future with millions of blockchain, and building that is not going to be easy. There's going to be some setbacks that the Celestia team will face, but they seem to be ambitious and have the talent and the expertise to experiment with the stuff. So imagine a future where you can deploy a blockchain as easy as it is to deploy a smart contract. We're basically thinking about building the same amount of proliferation of chains as there are smart contracts and applications on Ethereum. But super curious to see the rest of your journey. And thank you, Nader, for joining us today. And happy to answer any questions on the BAF Discord if you guys still want to discuss this more. And with that, I want to say thank you to our donors who help make BAF happen. We're funded by Ethereum Foundation, Solana Foundation, Protocol Labs, Near, and a couple other individual donors. If you're interested in funding BAF, my DMs are open. We're heads down fundraising. And again, really a pleasure having you, Nader, at this late of time. I didn't know about your time zone, but really appreciate all the knowledge. And with that, I'm going to end it here. Any final notes, Nader?
No, thanks for having me. And I'm still fairly new at Celestia. I've been there for about 4 or 5 weeks, and I myself am still like diving in and learning, all of this stuff. It's very nuanced. It's very complex, especially for someone like me who's only been in the space for a little over a year. And I'm really excited though to be working on kind of like with these founders. I resonate a lot with their backgrounds and their vision. And I think like our focus, like you mentioned, not maximalism, but I think just not maximalism is like the thing that really interests me, because I don't think that any of us care like if what we're doing succeeds. I think that we know that the work that we're doing is helping push the space forward. So if Ethereum or if someone else or if we or anyone succeeds in kind of like making Web3 and these public infrastructure and data that is kind of like the core concept of like of Web3, as long as this becomes accessible and people around the world are able to kind of interact, and we're able to onboard like the next tens or hundreds of millions of users, it doesn't matter like who did it. It's the fact that we kind of got there, and that's kind of what I really enjoy about being on this team. We are in it for, I think, the right reasons, and I enjoy that mindset and that approach.
100%. Love the team and love the vision of the open web. And with that, thank you guys so much for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your night. See you next week on our weekly BAF Twitter Spaces. Thank you.